Physics, Consciousness and Reality, Dickie Dredd and Nigel Adams. And today we are moving to part B in the book, and we move basically from the west to the east. So this is part 52 in the video series. So welcome to part B of Physics, Consciousness and Reality. In part A, we approached consciousness from the outside. We explored physics, neuroscience, evolution and philosophy, asking whether modern science could explain the mystery of subjective experience. We discovered that while science has taken us a long way, many of the deepest questions remain open. Part B approaches those same questions from a different direction. Instead of asking only how consciousness arises, we ask how human beings have explored consciousness directly for thousands of years. We turn to the great Eastern traditions, Buddhism, Vedanta, Daoism, Confucianism, Yoga, Qigong and others, not to replace the science, but to place them alongside it in the conversation. We'll encounter ideas that can seem strange at first: illusion, impermanence, non-self, emptiness, karma, dharma, compassion and enlightenment. But as we explore them, many begin to resonate with themes we've already met in physics and neuroscience. If the universe is relational rather than made of isolated things, if the self is less solid than it feels, if reality is more process than object, perhaps these traditions have been pointing towards aspects of reality that science is only now beginning to rediscover. This is not a book about proving Buddhism is correct, nor about turning physics into mysticism. In fact, throughout the series, we've been careful to separate evidence from speculation and to avoid the misuse of scientific language. The goal here is dialogue rather than dogma. We'll examine Nagarjuna's philosophy of emptiness, the Heart and Lotus Sutras, the Tao, the Wu Wei, Vedanta's vision of ultimate unity, yoga and tantra as practical disciplines, and later explore karma, dharma, suffering, liberation, compassion, death, rebirth and free will through Eastern eyes. Throughout, one theme keeps returning. These traditions are less concerned with winning arguments than with transforming experience. They remind us that some truths may only be understood through practice, not simply through thought. So, part B isn't a rejection of science, it's an invitation to widen the conversation. Perhaps understanding consciousness requires not only better theories, but different ways of looking, living and paying attention. And again, I must apologise for my pronunciation throughout this part. I can't pronounce half the bloody words. Let us begin. So, first of all, we're now moving to part B, Chapter 8, Framing and Foundations of Eastern Approaches. I'll give you a quick summary of Chapter 8. So this chapter introduces the reader to the core concepts of Eastern philosophy and sets the stage for how these traditions approach the same fundamental questions explored in Part A through physics and Western philosophy. It establishes why Eastern thought deserves attention in the discussion of consciousness and reality, not as dogma but as philosophy developed through centuries of direct experience and reflection. The opening section clarifies what is meant by Eastern philosophy, distinguishing it from religion in the theistic sense. Traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism and Daoism are presented not as systems of belief imposed by divine authority, but as rigorous methods of inquiry into the nature of mind, reality and self. They are philosophies born of meditation, contemplation and lived practice. From there, the chapter explores three foundational doctrines. The first is Maya, the idea of illusion. Here, the world as ordinarily perceived is seen as deceptive or partial, a veil hiding deeper truths. This links intriguingly to earlier sections on perception as an interface rather than a transparent window onto reality. Next comes impermanence, anicca. All phenomena are transient, endlessly changing, rather than clinging to permanence. Eastern traditions urge recognition of flux and flow, a perception resonating with modern science's emphasis on process of a static substance. Finally, the chapter examines no-self, anicca, the radical Buddhist critique of the ego. The I is shown to be fragile, constructed, and ultimately empty of inherent essence. The view not only anticipates insights from modern neuroscience, which sees the self as a cognitive construction, but also dovetails with interface theories in cognitive science. Together, these sections provide a foundation, Eastern thought as a set of philosophical tools for questioning reality, perception and identity, complementary to the scientific explorations that shaped Part A. So, we've all been taught to think that philosophy is something you read in books, but some of the oldest traditions in the world treated philosophy as something you actually do. That's where Eastern philosophy begins to look very different from the Western approach we've followed so far. Today we'll explore what we really mean by Eastern philosophy, why it still matters, and why these ancient traditions might have surprising things to say about consciousness, reality, and modern physics. So today we're on section 49, first section in part B, and what do we mean by Eastern philosophy? Up to now, we've been circling around physics, evolution, perception, ethics, consciousness, mostly from a Western scientific point of view. But if you've ever dipped your head into Buddhist texts, Hindu sutras, Taoist writings, or even the sayings of Confucius, you'll notice something uncanny. Many of the same questions have been asked for centuries in very different languages. The difference is that where the West has often learned on analysis, dissection and external measurement, the East has often turned to the gaze inward, to lived experience, practice and direct insight. When we say Eastern philosophy, we don't mean dogma or religion in the church and commandment sense. We mean the traditions of thought and practice that grew out of India, China and surrounding cultures. Frameworks that aimed not at building machines or equations, but at answering the most intimate riddle of all. What is this? Right here, right now. The main players we'll be drawing on are Buddhism, Hinduism, Daoism and Confucianism. Each has its own nuances, but they share some common threads. Buddhism explores impermanence, the illusion of self, and the possibility of liberation through direct awareness. I'll describe what I mean by liberation in a minute. Hindu philosophy, particularly Vedanta, asks whether the self, called Atman, and the ground of reality, called Brahman, are in fact one. Daoism emphasises flow, spontaneity and alignment with the way, the underlying order that can't be captured in words, that can be lived. Confucianism shifts the lens to society and ethics, asking how harmony can be cultivated in relationships and community. And I'll explain what I mean by liberation in this sense. So liberation here refers to the release from suffering that arises when one directly realises the impermanence and non-self nature of experience. In Buddhist thought, this is not freedom in a political or purely psychological sense, but a fundamental shift in perception, seeing through the illusion of a fixed, separate self and no longer clinging to transient phenomena. This state, often termed nirvana, is characterised by the cessation of craving, aversion and ignorance, is understood as a form of awakening rather than escape. Back to the main text. What unites these is not rigid doctrine, but a willingness to doubt the ordinary picture of self and world, to treat philosophy as something lived rather than just written. A Buddhist monk meditating in a cave, a Taoist sage wandering in the mountains, a Hindu yogi turning awareness inward. These weren't armchair philosophers, they were experimenters in consciousness. So why include them in this book? Because the questions we've been wrestling with, consciousness, illusion, ethics, free will, have echoes in these traditions. They offer different entry points, different metaphors, different practices. And while they don't speak in equations or lab data, they often cut straight to the experiential heart of matter. That doesn't mean we have to swallow them whole. Just like Western physics, Eastern philosophy has its blind spots, contradictions and historical baggage, e.g. patriarchy, ritual, sectarian squabbles, etc. But stripped back to their essence, they provide a mirror to the scientific story we've been tracing. Where science points to uncertainty and illusion, these traditions nod knowingly. They've been saying as much for millennia. This next stretch isn't just about trading particle physics for incense and chanting. It's about seeing what happens when you put them side by side. What can Buddhist impermanence tell us about relativity? What does Taoist flow say about quantum indeterminacy? Can Vedanta's oneness be squared with the modern ideas of consciousness might be fundamental? In short, Eastern philosophy here means practice-based philosophy, not belief systems, not radical experiments in living and perceiving. If science gives us the telescope, these traditions give us the microscope turned inward. Together, maybe they can sketch a better picture of what reality might actually be. So perhaps science and Eastern philosophy have been asking the same questions from opposite directions. One investigates the external world through experiment, the other investigates experience itself through disciplined observation. If both are searching for the nature of reality, then comparing them may reveal patterns neither approach can fully uncover alone. In the next video, we'll examine Western takes on Eastern philosophy and discover how philosophers and scientists have interpreted the ancient traditions through a modern lens.